Wait for it.
It needs to be louder. I can barely hear it. What? Why not? Stagger.
And that's a lot of damage. That is how all Sorcs are going to be killing Uber Lilith, as far as we know, probably for the rest of the preseason, if this isn't nerfed. Gigantic credit to Northwar for figuring this out. He's really been kind of on the forefront of brainstorming the way that damage works in Diablo 4 right now. Show him a ton of love. Particularly, he's the only person that's really pushing the boundaries of what Sorc is able to do. And what he did with this Blizzard Ice Spikes build is truly awesome. The really cool thing is it's kind of adjacent to some stuff that I've been playing around with. So that's very encouraging for the direction that I've been going down. And definitely this has now given me a path and a plan for what I want to do. If you want to basically one-shot everything in the game, especially Uber Lilith, this seems to be the build to go for. So I've been playing around with using Blizzard and experimenting with different sources of chill. Also using the Ice Spikes aspect to see if there was any value there, especially adding it into the Ice Shards build. As you can see, over the past 2 weeks, I've had 3 videos where I even go into playing a lot more with Blizzard and the value that it brings. So yeah, I'm incredibly encouraged like how powerful this actually scales and that it can do literally the hardest content in the game. Because we're scaling so much damage with the of control aspect, we do 35% up to 70%, which we'll get to in a second. We do 35% more damage to frozen enemies, and then it gets even more with immobilized and stunned. The other really interesting mechanic that Northwar is doing is he is using the increased crowd control duration modifiers, which, as far as I know, just made it so the crowd control that you applied, coming from Path of Exile would last longer. But it appears like it also scales how much crowd control that you apply. If each application of chill maybe lasted 1 second, making it last longer allows it to stack more stacks of chill more quickly, if that makes sense. So what he's doing is using both smiting as well as exploiters for a 20% additional crowd control duration, as well as an 80% more multiplier on his crowd control duration. So to demonstrate this, I'll do a regular Blizzard without those two, and you can see how long it takes to apply the freeze, and then I'll do it with those two, and you'll see how quickly it applies. So on a regular guy, this is without those two modifiers. We can see how long it takes. So that took quite a while to apply a freeze. Now let me combine those two with also Glacier so that our Blizzard is applying the Ice Spikes. The cool thing about this, and this is really kind of what is making his whole build tick, is when Blizzard is cast, you'll see that it is making these spikes come out that then explode. You really want to combine this also with Frozen Tundra, which will then make your Ice Spikes have a 50% increased explosion radius. There are 3 different Ice Spikes aspects. That is the Frozen Tundra here, that is the Glacial, and then the third one here is aspect of Frozen Wake that then makes your Ice Spikes chill inherently. This one would be really good to fit in to apply additional chill, but unfortunately this just really doesn't fit. You sacrifice too much by using the third one. But you really do want that larger radius, so you can see that the default explosion size is like kind of small like this. Those are the little explosions there. But if I put this on, you can see how big they get. It's huge, right? 50% bigger. This is huge to make sure that those Ice Spikes are always overlapping, particularly when you're doing your single target stagger. And let's see how quickly we can freeze a monster here. We can very quickly just keep the whole screen as permanently frozen as possible until they go unstoppable. And by building that stagger meter and really stacking as many blizzards as possible, as you can see, the more blizzards that you stack, the more explosions come out, the more chill that we are applying, the more we can freeze the monsters. Unfortunately, monsters do go unstoppable after a certain amount of time, and then diminishing returns there. And that's really the basic concept behind the build, is we just want to apply as much stagger as possible, and then he does a weapon swap to make sure that he does even more damage. I'll link everything that I can. This is all his credit in the description of the video below. But yeah, basically the idea is that he has a normal setup here. This is how he is building all of that stagger beater. He has the smiting on his wand here, and then he has of control here on his offhand. I'm actually not 100% sure that that is the right play. Maybe there's nothing else that he could actually fit on there, but I don't think this is doing anything when he's trying to build stagger meter. Yeah, if his mana were a little dicey, I do think Frozen Memories here might be a little bit better. Not a big deal. He's got plenty of mana sustain. I don't think it was a problem. I think he was getting literally nothing out of when he had this setup here with his offhand. So the big thing that he's doing is what is giving him all the damage is the ice spikes from the blizzard, stacking that as much as possible. And then he puts that on the amulet, so it's 50% stronger. It does 50% more damage. Farming for this, for switching over from the ice shards build to this, will be a challenging thing because you really want that top roll and you want to put it on your amulet. He's still using arraignment, so he's periodically teleporting onto the monster when he can. Stun is actually a huge stagger bar builder, so this is huge. Other tech that he's doing that I've been talking about is he's using Flame Shield to do Immobilize. Immobilize, much like Stun, is also a huge stagger meter builder, and it is one of the main sources that we deal more damage. When you put control on a two-handed staff, it goes from 35 to 70% damage. It doubles it. And so that 105% damage multiplier goes to 210% more damage when you have a fully staggered monster. Because when you stagger a boss, every single one of these applies. So it counts as immobilized, stunned, and frozen. And so that's why we want to build that stagger meter as much as possible. That's why you see the damage way accelerated when the boss gets staggered. And so what he's able to do is every time the teleport is up, he can teleport onto the monster. He can build that stagger meter there. When his flame shield is up, he can flame shield and walk through the monster. The immobilize is also a really big stagger builder. And possibly the actual single by itself multiplier that's, not control that you can get as a Sorc is using of Retribution. Distant enemies can be stunned. Distant is so far, we don't care about that. 8% is so low, but 40% more damage to stunned enemies. So staggered bosses are stunned. This is a gigantic multiplier. Basically mandatory if you're going to do any big single target damage. The other thing that he's doing is he's not using ice shards, right? So he has an additional slot on his bar that he can fill up. And then what he's doing here is he's using ice blades, which gives him full vulnerable uptime. He's spamming Frost Nova as much as possible for that vulnerable effect, but he doesn't have 100% uptime. 17-second cooldown, his is probably like 12 seconds or so, but that means he only has a 50% uptime on the vulnerable from his Frost Nova. Benefit there is Ice Blades will give you vulnerable 30% of the time that it hits. So this way he has a 100% vulnerable uptime with his Ice Blades, not to mention that it also reduces the cooldown by 0.1 seconds, which is very minor, of all of your other skills when it hits a vulnerable enemy. And just more application of all of your cooldowns, of course, is really big. So he wants to sit there and spam his Blizzard, get those ice spikes out, apply as much chill, stun, immobilize that he can onto the boss, builds that stagger meter as quickly as possible, and then he swaps over to his two-handed setup, which is just a gigantic damage boost. He's got good rolls on crit damage, vulnerable damage, intelligence, damage to close enemies, and then the big one there, of course, is of control, giving you up to 210% more damage multiplier. So that's the general setup right there. The other thing is he's using the Ice Blades enchantment, which just spawns more Ice Blades as you spam your cooldowns, which will just spawn more Ice Blades, which will give him more cooldowns that he can spam more, which will spawn more Ice Blades. It's a pretty cool little setup. In terms of the skill tree, this is very standard, actually. He's going into all mana here. He wants his mana as high as possible to never run out. He doesn't use any core skills, so he just has the mandatory points there. Going into Shimmering Flame Shield, Shimmering Teleport, Standard, Glass Cannon, 2 points in Elemental Attunement, Enhanced Ice Armor for more mana regen, Mystical Frost Nova for more vulnerable, the Summoned Ice Blades like I just said, going into Protection, and then he has 2 points into Cold Front. I think he just couldn't fit another point into there, but of course he would like that just for more chill application. Mage's Blizzard, just so that Blizzard lasts 4 seconds longer. Devouring Blaze is gigantic for our damage multiplier. This is an additional multiplier against immobilized enemies going up to 150%. Devouring Blaze, as we know, with control is the best way to scale damage on a Sorc. And then 1 point into Deep Freeze. He does swap into Deep Freeze just to have a little bit more safety during the Lilith second phase, but he doesn't really use it normally. And then using Avalanche for more damage and also more mana sustain. Paragon board, I'm just going to quickly go over the glyphs right here. He's using Elementalist right here, which makes me very happy because I was using it in my first video that I put out for Ice Shards, and people were telling me that it was bad. So what it does is we get 26% non-physical damage, which is not really huge, right? We get a lot more in some other glyphs, but the big thing here is dealing fire, cold, or lightning damage increases the enemy by 5%. This is by itself the biggest single more multiplier I think that we actually get from a glyph. I think we get up to 15% on any other one, but you do have to do fire, cold, and lightning. But since we are doing fire with the Firebolt enchantment, we're always doing cold, and teleport is lightning damage, we actually get that full 15% more damage multiplier. Frostbite right here is entirely cracked because it scales that prefix so huge. 243% increased damage, despite not having a more multiplier on the suffix, the 243% is so gigantic. It's obviously worth to go for. Next up is Tactician and the Frigid Fate board. This is basically mandatory no matter what build you're playing because this actually gives us flat vulnerable damage. It's not just regular increased damage. This is a flat vulnerable damage increase because what it's doing is it gives 125% bonus to rare nodes. And then the nodes around weakness right here give us some vulnerable damage that then gets scaled by Tactician, which is absolutely cracked. And as you can see, he has as many boards as possible. It's all about stacking those glyphs. As soon as we get to very high damage numbers, the most important thing is stacking every single more multiplier that we can get. So next up, he goes over to Burning Instinct. He puts in Control. This gives us 20% more damage to stunned or frozen enemies. Great multiplier. And then finally going up to Searing Heat here, putting in Flame Feeder for an additional 10% more damage. As you can see, we can scale gigantic increase on the prefix as well. So the two changes that I would make if I were going to play this for regular dungeons and not for doing Lilith was probably rotate these boards. So I take both Icefall and Frigid Fate. The high-end 5 million crit damage would be scaled down, but the quality of life of more easy mana sustain and defense from a barrier would be pretty huge. So yeah, that's the basic idea. I wanted to go over as much of the mechanics as I could. One of the most important things is to have a very, very strong Glacial. As you can see, my Glacial here is absolute trash. You want to get that as high level as possible. You want to have really good gear that all has vulnerable, crit damage, all that type of stuff. His version is obviously way more tuned to just killing Uber Lilith. My plan is to make a more general purpose version, so definitely get subscribed if you want to see me kind of transition my build into that. Yeah, I was playing around with ice spikes for a while. You know, you can see it on stream if you want to check the past couple VODs. It's a thing that I thought was really interesting, but I didn't know that it could scale this high damage. And I'm really impressed with what Northwar did, and I'm encouraged to try out my own version of it. Now it looks like we have 3.5 to 4 viable builds on a Sorc, which is really encouraging. I do think Sorc, at least in terms of quality of life, is still underpowered compared to especially like Druid or Barb. But it's cool to see that we can actually, with proper planning and theory crafting, have really high damage and, and hang with the big boys. So I'm really excited to put this together myself. Definitely join me on stream today, twitch.tv/subtractem, as I start farming up for this. Level 93 right now. I'm excited to now have a very accessible Lilith kill coming in the next couple days. So it's really, really exciting. Yeah, thanks for watching. I'll see y'all tomorrow. Goodbye.